Right. Hello, everyone. My name's Ian Wagdin. I am Production Innovation Executive for Vision Productions up at Salford, Media City. So I look after a whole bunch of new ways of working and trying to get production to work in new ways using HD, some of the file-based stuff you've seen here, and generally looking after workflows. This session is a session on sustainability, which is something that kind of caught my eyes a couple of months ago when I first met Janet, when I went on a course to learn about sustainable project management. And there are a few things that came up on that course that really kind of opened my eyes to things that we need to start thinking about in production. And the future of production and what it really all means. And Janet and I have had a few discussions over this over the past month or so, and Richard Smith is also here, who's our project manager for sustainability, so he may jump in at some point later. So Janet, do you just want to introduce yourself and tell us what your role is?
Okay, hi everybody. I'm working with BBC R&D. Very strange title, Senior Lead Technologist in charge of sustainability for broadcasting technology. Basically, I did my degree years ago in the environment and couldn't get a job back then, so ended up working in broadcasting and went involved with high definition television. I was with Canadian Broadcasting, so I've been through the transition that we've looked at the Olympics with super high vision. But in 2007, I went back to university and got another degree because I'm quite passionate. I'm a mum. I'm passionate about life, and I don't like what's happening. So I've been lecturing at university for the last 5 years on technology, society, and environment, and environmental impact assessment of buildings, as well as in the business program in Monaco, how to put sustainability into the business plan. Sustainability, and Ian and I were talking about this just now, you can't have green and sustainable separate from your business. It has to be a completely integral part of business in the future and in your life. So what I'd like to do is, I'm a practical person and I like to work with facts. And I always like to get my audience, particularly in the afternoon or the last day, I want you to wake up. So I'm going to give you a calculation to do in a minute. So, some facts. Climate change is no longer something that might be there. We've definitely got temperature change. Now, it's actually been calculated scientifically that if you go over 2 degrees from 1990 levels, then we will have a serious problem of weather, climate change getting a lot worse. But the issue is, August 2012, we've already gone up 0.62 degrees of that 2 degrees. Right, some pretty pictures there. Top left corner, in September, that were the fires that were currently burning globally. Underneath, they were the floods in the world. If you guys remember when they originally had the tsunami in the Far East, it was a big story and we all sent money out there. We're having so many of those similar events, we kind of take them for granted now, and I think we all saw what happened in New York last week. The other picture is what's happening in the Arctic, and this summer, some of you may have heard it on the news in between that politician that called a policeman a pleb, but there was the announcement that the Arctic has melted more than ever in history. Now, the news that followed that was, oh, by the way, BP have done a deal with the Russians and they're actually going to be drilling for oil because they haven't got the ice up there. No one was telling the story that by having that much ice melted, you've lost a reflective surface. So we're going to be heating the globe more. So more carbon dioxide in the air, you're going to end up having more of a greenhouse effect, and we're going to hit that 2 degrees quicker than later. Right, here's your calculation, guys, and some of the people have said to me, well, we've always had cyclical climate change. Well, yes, we've been doing this. We've been going about 260 parts per million of carbon dioxide for centuries, and we can tell that from ice cylinders that you can get out of the Arctic and the Antarctic. But since the Industrial Revolution, this 260 has started going up. Well, if you look, you can see in August 2010, it was 382 parts per million. We're now at 392. We're going up about 2.5 parts per million per year. And the tipping point is 450. So here's the calculation, guys. How old are you going to be when we hit 450? So we're right at the moment, we're 392. 450 is the tipping point, and we're going up at 2.5 parts per million a year. Anyone good in maths? We're talking 21 years from now. I'm hoping, and I'm older than a lot of you, I hope I'm going to be here in 21 years, but an awful lot of people are going to be here in 21 years' time. So, what I'd like to do is to put sustainability in general and sustainability in broadcasting into perspective. Sustainability is satisfying the needs for today without damaging future generations' ability to satisfy their needs. So it basically means you can't keep taking all the resources out of the world now and leaving nothing for your children and grandchildren. It means keeping society, the environment, and the economy, stroke technology, in balance. If you start making the economy and technology getting bigger and bigger, then you are affecting society, and we've already seen that in a lot of areas. So embracing sustainability is actually an opportunity for business, for our own personal lives, society, and a fragile planet. Now, the broadcast and communications industry is energy intensive. I remember a few years ago, NHK said they were the second largest energy user in Japan. And we've got a problem because we've got recent trends now in this industry of let's make more content, put them on more platforms to more people anywhere in the world. And I'm sure some of you have been on trains and see that people have sometimes 3 or 4 platforms on their lap. So as a result of this, we're actually possibly making some reductions in carbon, but we're actually passing that carbon and increasing downstream carbon to the consumer. Now, the BBC, and Richard's been involved in this with Albert, is actively looking for ways to reduce carbon and water footprints and waste. Now, Albert is a carbon calculator for production. What we're working on in R&D is Victoria and Albert, which basically is a carbon calculator for projects. So if you're going to put in a data center somewhere, you can start from scratch and see, are we best going in that route, or are we best going in another route? And I'm going to point out something when we were doing the course Ian was talking about. We've got to start thinking when we're putting in buildings about industrial symbiosis. What Ian mentioned when we were looking at where we were going to put a data center in the course, we realized data centers make heat. Okay, let's use that heat. Let's start making waste have values. Perhaps we put a David Lloyd's sports centre next door. And I think you said, let's pump the hot air into the jacuzzi next door, rather than just waste it. There we go. So striving towards sustaining the future of broadcasting, it's not limited by our technical abilities. Environmentalists know exactly what we need to do for us to have a sustainable planet in the future. Problem is, a lot of people aren't listening. It's not limited by technical ability. It's more by economic constraints, limited resources, but we have an enormous number of unanswered questions about digital communications. For example, do we know what the impact is of giving a growing child 2 hours of content via 2 platforms in 1 hour of time? Is that being responsible for increasing the reduced attention span that we're seeing? What's it doing to e-waste, this sort of thing? And constantly taking non-renewable resources from the planet can only happen for so long. We've got to develop a better understanding of the cause and effect of our actions. And that's got to be from how we manufacture devices, to creating content, to how we deliver, and how we consume content. Changing to a sustainable way is going to be it's going to be more likely to be driven by the market than complying with legislation or just simply wanting to reduce energy costs. Now, markets change when circumstances force them to change, such as resource scarcity, and I'm going to get onto that in a minute. Energy taxes. Somebody said to me the other day, if they suddenly put the carbon tax that Australia has at the moment in the UK, how many businesses in this room would still be in business? Now, sustainability, it's a buzzword. We've all heard it. But does everybody understand really what it means? It's kind of a buzzword without the buzz. People recognize the word, but when you actually ask them to explain it, certainly in my experience, well, it's recycling and it's carbon reduction. It's a lot more than that. They don't fully appreciate the meaning, therefore if you don't understand something, you're not going to act upon it. So it's only when sustainability gets understood that it can be as an essential focus for broadcasting and the focal point of any corporate strategy, whether it's the companies that are on the stand here or public broadcasters. So we need to reduce costs, improve public reputation, and make a positive difference to the environment. Now, sustainability is not restricted to recycling and carbon, as I've just said. We have to start thinking the whole chain in the environment. And there's something recently which has come up. You've all heard of nanoparticles. They're using nanoparticles a lot in computer chips. There's a research study recently which says that the nanoparticles are so small that when they're in equipment which needs to be recycled, the nanoparticles wash away in the wash water. There's a study now which shows that those nanoparticles get ingested into mammal cells and are making animals unable to reproduce. Ian pointed out perhaps we should think about the human population with that, but we'll get onto that later. But we have to start looking at our business so that our children and future generations can still have an enjoyable life and flourish. Now, if you just hope that some miracle is going to happen, or that you choose to ignore the situation, then things will get worse a lot quicker. And many of you, if you don't address sustainability in your businesses, I can tell you, you may not be in business in a few years. So what is sustainable broadcasting? Well, I think to a certain extent, it's almost an oxymoron, isn't it? If you look at the presentation by Andy Quested on all the new technology that's coming along, hang on a second, how can we do that and be sustainable? Is it too complicated to think about? Is it too bigger a problem that I haven't a clue how to deal with it, so I'll ignore it? Is it a plan that we quite haven't finalized yet? Is it storytelling within environmental constraints? And I think, Ian, you brought this up yesterday, didn't you? That we've got to perhaps look at what we're here for, and that's to tell stories. Or is it a vehicle to educate a global population with a growing global problem? So what is it? We could say that it's a technology that enables a required functionality, whether it be a camera, a switch or whatever, but at the same time ensures that the opportunities and markets for future generations are not diminished. Now, note, that doesn't mean business as usual, but we'll just make a little bit of a reduction. We've got to balance the economy with the environment and society. Or, as I said, we could step back and say, what are we actually here for? We're here for storytelling, where sustainability perhaps has to be an integral part of any technology, any system, any service. Now, companies addressing sustainability find there are a few quick fixes. I did an environmental audit at the weekend, and I can guarantee that in that building, we are going to save about 10% of energy when I write up my report this week. So you can make some quick fixes, whether it's leaving lights on, using different sorts of equipment with lower energy. But if you start going beyond 10%, you're actually going to have to make an investment. But the cost today is going to be substantially less than the cost in the future. The recent economic crisis has challenged businesses with lower margins, and it's meant that those companies that have been starting to make sustainable products, they've had to improve operational efficiency to meet growing demand more effectively and more profitably. And there are some companies on the floor here that are looking at making products that are upgradable. We've got to stop destructive replacement, meaning the new X plus 1 makes X redundant, therefore it ends up in landfill. The current sort of taking the same sustainability approach for design for the environment, design for recycling, design for remanufacture, it does come at a cost, but if you want to stay in business, that's seriously what you've got to start doing. We need to consider the 7 R's. You've probably heard of reuse and recycling. I'm up to 7 now. You've got recycle. We all know what that is. We've got remanufacture. This means that a manufacturer needs to make a product and get an arrangement with their customer that that product is going back to them. They will then take it apart, use some of the components, and remanufacture it into another product. And I know you're going to laugh at the next one, repair. We have not repaired products because it's been cheaper to buy new products from areas in the world where they were paying child labor or very, very low salaries. That is changing. We've already seen a couple of weeks ago a documentary on Chinese kids saying, hang on, we want to have the same salaries that they have in the Western world. We've got China and India that have been developing countries actually aspiring to be like we are. So we may have to start looking at repairing products. We need to reuse them. Let's say at the BBC we're no longer using a particular product in a department. There might be a school, there might be somewhere that can actually reuse that product rather than generating more waste and making new or energy for new products. We've got to reduce. And in 2012, this is a really difficult concept. You tell a kid at Christmas, oh, by the way, instead of the 20 presents that you've got around the tree, Mum and Dad are only going to give you 1 because we've got to think about the environment. We have to do that in business. We've got to reduce the equipment, or we've got to make better programs and more programs with the equipment we've got. We've got to return things. How many of you have ever been to a shop, you've bought something, you've got home and you've said, really isn't what I want. So it either ends up in the garage, the loft, or some drawer. Take it back, return it, make sure that somebody else might use it. And the final one is resource. Now, I don't mean resource, I mean resource. We're going to be getting various components on our planet that are diminishing. We've got to start resourcing. We've also had situations, you might remember after the tsunami in Japan, the tape supplies, HD tape was getting really difficult. I think Disney bought up most of the tape because that was where the tape was being made. A few years previous to that, in Thailand, there were major floods, and the only manufacturer of the arm that goes in a hard drive went underwater. What impact does that have on our industry if we've only got one place to source products? Now, for many years, this industry, in the electronics manufacturing industry, we've made new products, we've made them more frequently, more cost effectively, and more easily disposable. Now, traditionally, electronic products, they're not built to last years, are they? And consumers alike, just like manufacturers, you're anticipating, aren't you, version 1+2, 1+3, 1+4. I often ask myself, when iPhone 5 came out and I saw the huge queues in Shepherd's Bush in Westfield, all queuing for iPhone 5, were they actually wanting iPhone 5 to show their friends they had iPhone 5, or were they wanting it because it had better functionality? The marketing strategy to produce volume sales to maximize profitability comes at a cost. Electronic waste. Electronic waste is the fastest growing waste stream in the world. Repairing and recycling could mean that for every 11,000 tons of electronic waste, you could create 296 jobs. You've got to remember, we haven't got a diminishing population, we've got a growing population. They've got to have jobs, they've got to pay taxes so that we can have schools and all the other things. But recycling technology has been really difficult Because with our high-tech products, we've got miniaturization. And with miniaturization, we've also got oil-based component packaging. And we've got lightweight products. When they're lightweight, as Hewlett-Packard's told me recently, it's very difficult to make lightweight and robust. So it becomes less robust, therefore it's disposable. Our biggest problem is we're not recycling enough. Now, we talk about the WEEE directive, the Waste for Electronic and Electrical Equipment. The WEEE directive was the most expensive thing that came out of the European Union with the least amount of effect. Because what's actually happening, a lot of our electronic waste is simply getting on a ship, going to China and to India. They're dipping it in acid, they're taking the gold, the platinum, the palladium out of it, and they're putting it on landfill in the Maldives, in their own countries. We're actually disposing of about 20 to 50 million tons of electronic waste every year. And in 2015, IDC, a consulting firm, have projected that 1 billion smartphones alone will be purchased in 2015. 350 million tablets since 2010. And we're buying 350 to 400 million computers every year. Do think the next time you need to upgrade your contract for your cell phone, do you really need the next cell phone? Imagine you've got a box of chocolates. Everybody like chocolate here? I do, I love chocolate. When you come to the end of the box, you're with your friends, and you go out to buy another one. Oh, we've got a problem. The tsunami has completely wiped out all the cocoa fields. What are you going to do? The other thing is you might have ordered a new car. Only there's a component of a rare earth element that's needed for one part of the car. So you're never going to be able to drive it. Well, we've got a problem in this industry, and it's called rare earth elements. It's a funny name, actually, because they're not really rare. They're just incredibly difficult to get out of the ground. So we have a problem that in 2017, the rare earth elements that we use in mobile phones, in-ear headsets, computers, TVs, we're going to have a shortfall. It takes 10 years to open a new mine. This industry is going to have a problem. Oops, wrong one. Not only are we going to have a problem with scarcity, but what happens with supply and demand? If you don't have the supply, what happens to the price? Price goes up. And you've seen this with neodymium, which gets used in hard drives and laptops, went up 80% last year. Europium went up a staggering 625% in the same period. Now, just to give you an idea of what gets used, if we look at a monitor and a computer, to make it, you need 240 kilograms of fuel. You need about 15,000 litres of water. Now, interestingly, that's exactly the same amount of water you need to make 1 kilogram of steak on your plate. The next thing, you need about 21 odd kilograms of chemicals. But if you just take 1 million cell phones, look at the amount of gold. I'm struggling to read it here. 23 kilograms. Okay, yeah. It's better here. 9,091 kilograms of copper, 9 kilograms of palladium, 250 kilograms of silver. We only have so much of this in planet Earth. We don't have an inexhaustible supply. And what's happening is we've seen climate change going on a curve, which it's interesting, isn't it? It's the same curve as population growth. It's the same curve as resource depletion, as the same curve as lost land, etc. I have a glass of water there.
Yeah.
Okay. I said I like facts. Let's do a calculation here. There's a known calculation used in economics called the IPAT equation. What it means is the environmental impact is equivalent to population times the affluence, which is generally expressed in terms of GDP, times technology. Right, we have European directives and global directives, although we do have a country that doesn't want to be part of it. We need to reduce our energy 90%. We need to reduce our carbon 90% by 2050, or we have a problem. Let's look at what it means to that calculation. Remember, we've got this exponential rise of population. So to lower the impact, well, we're not going to go around and kill people, so we're not going to lower consumers, but we've got to lower consumer expectation. That's got to be followed by lowering consumption. And technology, which takes energy to make technology, we're going to have to be doing a lot of technology to actually clean up some of the mess that we've already got. Sorry? 90%. So something to do if you're on the train and you've got Wi-Fi connection, go into www.carbonfootprint.com. And you can actually work out your own personal carbon footprint. Now, the average American has a carbon footprint of 22. The average inhabitant of the Maldives has a carbon footprint of 1.4. The average European has 9. So if you're going to be an average European at 9, look at what you've found out. What of those things that you do, 90% of it, are you going to reduce? So really, this equation shows that with population increasing and reductions in waste and technology and carbon, what have we actually got to do to change things? Now, the ICT industry is about 2% of total emissions. Broadcasting is a bit more than that because the ICT report that went out didn't talk about program production, although I know Rich is doing a lot of work in getting that reduced. It's pretty small, but it's still significant. It's the same as aviation. And some of you might say, well, technology is going to solve climate change and global warming. Anyone believe that here? Technology is going to be the solution? No, because I was involved in high definition when it first started, did the public demonstrations in the States. When in 1980 we did the first tests with HDTV, I was quite surprised to find that HDTV had been conceived the year of colour television. Now, when we actually did the first test broadcasts out of Canada, the engineers in 1989 said to me, oh, by the way, we're already thinking about super high vision. Just look at the number of years that you need to make a paradigm shift in technology. Not talking about, we can just reduce the energy in that particular platform. Talking about a paradigm shift, totally different economy. So it takes a long time. Now, one of the things manufacturers have got to start doing is looking at life cycle assessment. And life cycle assessment, I'll move on from that. Life cycle assessment, that means looking at comparing products. What's the best way to go? So from cradle to grave. So you're going to look at where all the resources come from for your product, what transportation you've got, how it's being used in manufacturing, what energy and what other resources are needed for use, and what are you going to do when it's no longer, you're retiring the product. Are you going to be able to take it back, as I said, to do remanufacture? So some technologies like LED are actually looking at energy reductions. But a full life cycle assessment is quite expensive to do. There's a lot of software around, Gabi and others, that enable you to look at your products and do a life cycle assessment. But it's actually a good tool for business because you can find out how to save money. Now, with the LEDs, the sort of data you're going to get, the data you will get, it's not just what the carbon footprint is. You're going to find out what's the human toxicity level, what level is global warming potential. And it's a difficult problem because you're going to find some of the values might be high, some might be low, but you have to decide if you do this, what makes the best answer, or if you do that, what's the best answer. Did anyone see the Dara Brian's Science Club last night? Okay, because he said something which is what I'm going to talk about. If we talk about energy globally, we've actually got no problem in providing enough renewable energy. If you actually took an area in sub-Saharan Africa or in northern Africa and put in a solar concentration, I don't mean photovoltaic, but put in a solar concentration plant the size of Bulgaria, you would have enough energy to supply the whole world just from sun. But we're not doing it. So I'm going to end now. We're going to have a bit of a discussion. And why I've put that there is we have to think about environmental sustainability in our lives. So when you go to the pub tonight, go for a beer, guys, because a beer uses less water and less energy than a glass of wine, than a glass of milk, or even a cup of coffee.
So that's a great, interesting fact on which to end. So let me just pick up on a couple of topics there. So we talked about sustainability in general. You talked about sustainability in general and how it's more than just kind of being green and lowering our energy requirements and stuff like that. So I think that's quite key to us. Can I just ask the room, how many of you are kind of manufacturers, broadcasters? I know you are. Broadcasters, independent filmmakers, indie filmmakers, other. So you're all involved in broadcast. Students? We've got any students?
Can I ask where you're from?
Sorry, your tutor. Okay. System integration.
System integrators, yeah.
Okay, so you guys have got a big part to play in some of this, because I think we really need to start thinking about actually how do we, when we do a systems integration, where those products come from. And I think as we start to ask for more systems integration work to happen, we'll certainly be looking at, as part of those tender processes for the impact and the total life cycle of products that we're using in those and what we can reuse. But actually, key to me is it comes down to the business. All right? So you've talked a lot about actually the environmental impact. What's the business impact of this? Because quite traditionally, I think we've seen green as we have to spend a bit more money to be green, or a little bit more resource or something to be green. And actually, it's not often the cheapest option. Why should I consider it as part of my business?
I think you should consider it because that's what you're going to need to do to stay in business. And I think we'll certainly see, as I pointed out, when we get rare earth elements, and China, by the way, controls 97% of rare earth elements. And if you haven't got key components for your products, what are you going to do? You know, it's not a question of I'll go somewhere else. There isn't anywhere else to go.
I think I could say that's a problem for the manufacturers.
Yeah.
But for me as a broadcaster, okay, I might be able to source some of that stuff, but there must be a business impact. So I've just bought a bike and I'm using the train more, and got rid of a car, not because it was greener, but because it was cheaper and I felt I was being a little bit more healthy in doing it. So what's in it for me as a profit line really underneath that?
As a profit line, if you want to stay in business, you want to keep your employees in work, perhaps one of the things you've got to be looking at is this traditional business model cycle of let's change the new product every 6 months or whatever is not sustainable from a resource point of view. So what have you got to do? Perhaps what you might want to be looking at is offering services, which obviously the systems integrators are doing, but as a manufacturer offering services, it's when you start decoupling economic growth from the environmental, when you decouple growth from the economy, that's quite a difficult thing to get around, but this is what's being talked about a lot. So perhaps provide services to people.
Okay. And do we have, I mean, as a broadcaster, do we have some sort of ethical responsibility as well to get some of the message out there, or to, or does that really sit with the consumers and the manufacturers? I can keep making content, but I make content because my audiences want that content, and I use the manufacturers because they enable me to make that content in the most efficient way.
Well, the BBC has inform, educate, entertain. I think broadcasters globally do have an ethical responsibility, because amongst environmentalists, the biggest problem that we have is lack of awareness. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people think sustainability is just lower your carbon, lower the energy, and recycle. They don't think of the complete picture. And so I think broadcasters and content creators have a role to help inform the public. I'd love personally, and Richard and I have spoken about this, I'd love personally to see a program which starts showing people how good sustainable living is. We see the dramatic icebergs melting, we see the tsunamis, this sort of thing. But generally, it's over there.
Do we not have that though? I mean, Channel 4 have done great stuff with Grand Designs. I love watching Grand Designs, and every single house these days seems to be about a sustainable house. There's nobody kind of knocking one up and not thinking about it when they're building it. So.
Well, the BREEAM, which is the building directive, says that by 2016, all new buildings have to be carbon neutral. So if anyone's near Gatwick, there's a whole big development where the houses are already being built with solar thermal, photovoltaic on the roof, different insulation. They won't need the same heat because of the way they've been built and oriented, etc. So that's going to change. The difficulty, Ian, is in our own BBC, when we have old buildings, when we look at people up north who are in some buildings which are over 100 years old, they're not built.
It's not just up north. I think there are some in the southwest as well.
Yeah, okay. A lot of buildings,
We've got new buildings,
it's the refurbishment which is the problem. It's not impossible, but it is at a cost. And I think that's why we're seeing the government at the moment offering incentives for improved insulation and this sort of thing.
But Sky are making quite a big play of being carbon neutral at the moment, and I think a lot of us are kind of looking at how they're achieving that. So there is an industry move, I think, in that
I think
space.
there's an industry move, and I think it's the strategy for the business plan which is going to make that move even further.
Okay, any questions from the floor? We can get a microphone to you, I think.
Hi, I work in an area which is both production and broadcast, but specifically within the production area of that. And we see a lot of sort of the placing of an opposition almost between that which is environmentally friendly and the technological change. You've just brought up a really nice example of the housing where harnessing that new technology, they're producing something that's, a gorgeous possible concept for something going forward. Have you any ideas of how we as producers can better work with current technologies, help shape those technologies in order to work towards a goal which I think it's a complete no-brainer, and that if you asked everybody in this whole auditorium, they'd all want to see a sustainable future, but it's how we all achieve that and how we can best do that.
In my experience, whether you're a small company, whether you're a big corporation, the only way sustainability gets embraced is when you have a top-down directive. And a lot of consultants in the environment will say the same thing. So I think if you've got top-down, that actually helps. One of the things people have difficulty getting their head around, that's why I gave you the example of go on that carbonfootprint.co and just think personally, what would you have to do in your life? I mean, Ian's now cycling to work as opposed to driving. That's a big difference. I've put PV on my roof purely because it's a financial and an environmental advantage to me. And if the lights go out from the grid, I've got a way of having lights. So once you start doing some things, small things, you can make a little bit of a difference. Where we're missing, and that's why we need this top-down direction, is we've actually got to make a paradigm shift in the way we do things. And people can't get their head around that at the moment. Because there's not enough information. I'm not criticising.
It's a vast change, and I'm struggling with it because I go out there and I kind of look at how do we make stuff for more screens in HD, in the next generation of stuff that comes along, and file-based delivery. We're being told that tape is not particularly green and it takes up a lot of carbon, so therefore we should move to delivering files, which from my individual perspective means I'm not burning as many DVDs or creating as much resource and stuff like that. But is that really the answer? Is it greener to get rid of tape and kind of have huge data centers storing this stuff rather than shelves without lights on that just kind of sit there forever?
I mentioned earlier about life cycle assessment, and it's very, very difficult to make a lot of people, if they go into the ladies' or the gents' toilets, they'll say, oh, I better use the paper towel because after all that's recyclable. But it's actually better for energy and resources to use a Dyson Airblade, because they've done a life cycle assessment and they've done it on because what happens with paper or cloth towels is you've got to look at how you get it, and you've got to have waste and then you've got to have transportation, the whole thing. So, sorry, I've lost my train of thought there.
No,
Ian.
no. Is it what's the answer really?
Yeah,
in that.
It's doing a life cycle of how you do things, because unless you actually know what the impact is, and this is what Richard's been working on, when you can actually see what the carbon footprint is of a program, you can make decisions, but you can't make decisions on gut feel.
So.
And you were asking about tape. We've done some research at R&D, which has taken an hour of programming over DTT versus an hour of programming over IP. Hands up if you think over IP is best. Hands up if you think over DTT is best. Does that mean that...
A lot of us sitting on the fence.
Right, a lot of sitting on... Actually, over DTT, it is better. The problem we've got with that is how do you get that?
Number of viewers, though?
Yeah, if you've got one viewer,
yeah.
DTT is enormously energy intensive. But we have programs which have millions of viewers. And if we're going to be looking at television coming over the internet, that's going to be a big downstream.
But you talked about recycling, and a lot of people don't just use the internet just to watch telly. They'll use it to do their shopping. They'll use it to go on Facebook. They'll use it to go on Twitter. So it's, a stick on a hill transmitting to my television in the corner just does one job, maybe a few other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
So surely it has to be more sustainable to have one single platform that delivers that content into me than an old-fashioned stick on a hill. Is that me breaking up?
I couldn't figure out whether I was moving. Well, data centres, which are running all this, is a problem. We've got some of the older data centres which are incredibly inefficient. You've got actually about twice the energy to make a data centre function, because you've not only got the energy to make the servers go whirring around, but you've got the energy to cool down the system. There are various data centre companies that are looking at new ways of doing this. But I think one of the awareness issues is that the average person at home, when they get their tablet or their notebook out and start going on the internet, they say, I just bought this, it's got really low energy. What they don't realise is that when they're accessing Facebook, when they're accessing iPlayer via Facebook, each time they're doing a manipulation, they're actually creating servers to run. So we need to do a lot of work actually in that, and University of King's College London are doing quite a lot of work with Bristol on that.
So is energy the source of the problem? Is that the big killer? Is it the amount of energy you will use, or are there other elements in it?
One of the things you have to think about with energy and carbon is you actually have to use energy, and it's about the same as a data centre. You use the same amount of energy almost to create new energy. So, if you're refining oil, you've got to use energy to dig it or drill it out of the ground and do something with it, which is why we desperately need to look at renewable energy. And solar, to a certain extent, is by far the best. Tidal is the only one of the renewable energies that actually is predictable, guaranteeable. Wind energy, as we know from some of the reports, if you put it in, I guess, on top of the media city in Manchester, you're going to get the thing going around like crazy. But you can't always guarantee you're going to get the wind.
So sorry, is that a question? Sorry, is the microphone come over to...
Ages ago, the Russians set up a water tidal flow through channels, which made it the lowest cost of any tidal power, basically. By developing better turbines and
there's quite a lot of research at the moment on tidal energy. Yeah. A friend of mine actually, very sadly, has suffered as the result of a trawler that went past, but he had a new prototype with the Scottish government.
Yeah, the Scottish one with snakes, but they reckon it's too many people can break on it or something.
Recently, a trawler forgot to pull up its anchor and went past, so it was completely ruined the prototype. One of the issues with tidal, and this is why we have to look at the whole impact, is that yes, we're looking at generating the energy, but what is putting those turbines underwater done to the fish stocks in the area?
Yeah, well, the noise and stuff.
And the noise,
pollution.
the motion, we have to look at whatever we do, what is the impact?
And you've got tide twice a day, and sun goes down and solar doesn't work, so...
Yeah.
Sorry, there's another question. There's a question next door to you.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back.
Hi. So Janet, we spoke yesterday, and there's a little bit of an example of this. I stayed over last night, forgot my toothbrush, went to Boots, thought, well, being in charge of the requirement and my cost, I was looking for the cheapest thing I could buy. And for 49p, I could buy 4 toothbrushes. And then remembering our conversation along these lines, I thought, no, I'll go for something that will last me a little bit longer. Spent £2.09 on the toothbrush that I can take home and use in the future for travel. Using that as an example, when it comes to, so I'm a supplier to the BBC, when we see a requirement come out, and you're dealing with the technical guys who perhaps have their requirement, there is that disconnect between then it's looked at the total cost of ownership, how much will it be, what are the refresh cycles, and that gap of, yeah, but if you pay that little bit more, fine, it's perhaps new technology, it can cope with a lot more, it might be over-performant, but it will last that much longer, so when applications require more power, it's going to be there. How are we going to get that type of, hang on a minute, look at the environmental impact, don't just rip and replace? How's that, going to come into that type of discussion?
Shall I answer that? Because I think it's kind of, as a key stakeholder in some of those projects, I think we do look at the total cost of ownership, and that's it's the business line that will drive it for me. When I look at it and say, okay, do I have the requirement? Does the bit of kit that you're selling me, does it meet the requirements that I've got? What are my future requirements likely to be? Because the last thing I want to do is overspec something or buy something I don't need and pay extra for it because it's overspec'd. So if you can come to me and say, okay, you can do this, but you can also do this, and there's an added benefit, and the total cost of ownership is better, then I think it's got to be worth considering.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. I mean, we've got that in retail, a particular high street large store where you see girls come out at the weekend with 15 bags because they can buy dresses for £4. It's very, very difficult for that market, perhaps because of the fact they have low income, the same way as why they're buying Thai chicken, which has been pumped up with hormones and water, but they're buying it because it's cheap. But there is an environmental impact on that.
It's also, sorry, I think shall I stand on shall I stand here? It's also about what we can share, and one of the things we obviously Salford was built around is actually how many of these technologies can we put in and share with other people that are on the same campus, traditionally competitors or people that we didn't have close partnerships with. And if you can build something like Media City that you can have lots of people sharing the same infrastructure, I think that's got to be a good thing as well. And you'll see initiatives across the DPP as well coming out that are starting to look at actually what's common about what we can share. That's why the facilities model is such a great thing. Hiring cameras is probably better than buying them unless you can guarantee that you're going to get the use out of it. It might be a little bit more expensive, but actually that camera is used over and over and again, and you get 100% utilisation out of it, maybe rather than 50%. I'm conscious of time, so we'll just come down to...
Yes.
I just had one question because I thought it was really striking and really, really interesting. And I'm a parent too, I'm a tutor, and I'm training future broadcasters. And I'm really, really worried when I see younger generation who are so hungry for technology, the latest iPad, you were speaking of the latest iPhone. All my students are over-invested in technology. I don't see them becoming ethical citizen, and they're not really that green, they're not really politically aware, because they are a generation of consumers, because we are in the era of capitalism, and it's just we train this generation to become just have loads of credit cards and buy. We've never ever said, oh no, actually think about your carbon footprint. Yes, the university is green, but I don't think the consciousness is there. So this is where it's not sinking.
Yeah, I think it's an issue, particularly amongst some of the students that I've been teaching. But it's you've pointed out, we've pushed consumerism, whether it's buying a 40-inch TV set versus a 37-inch or a 32-inch. It's having something for the sake of having something and telling your friends you've got it, rather than actually having something that you need. For example, for Christmas, think about this. Offer 4 hours of time to somebody that you would do anything for them in 4 hours, within reason, of course, guys. But We've got to think differently about doing that. I don't know, personally, I struggle with this, how we change that consumer model. Is it going to be that suddenly, I mean, what was it, 2 weeks ago, electricity prices in the UK went up in some places 15%. Is it going to be that suddenly consumers actually can't afford the power to be running some of the things that they're doing? Is it the way things are going, companies will go out of business, therefore people won't have the jobs, therefore they won't be able to afford this consumerism? I don't know. But if you come up with a way to deal with that, I'm sure we could do a lot of consulting around the world and make a difference.
Yeah, so we're at time. I'd just like to finish with one question,
Yeah.
Which is obviously BVE South coming up in 6 months' time, and I'm sure there'll be another one of these up here in a year's time. What would you like to see change out there on the show floor or in the seminars in order to make this higher up the agenda?
I think what I'd really like to see, and I do thank you very much for the few of you that came. We had a seminar earlier which was on all the high tech, what's happening with 3D, what's happening with 4K, what's happening with HK, Super HD, bigger monitors, all this sort of thing. There was standing room only. Those people, I predict, do not fully understand sustainability. I would like to see more people coming in and not thinking, oh, it's, I hate the word green. I don't like the word sustainability. I'd much rather it became part of what we're doing. So I would like those people to come, because I've got the sense there's a few of you here, and certainly Richard, you already think about the environment. I want people to come and learn some of the facts that might make them think differently, and not go, oh, we can't go back and live in caves, which is what I hear quite regularly. You don't have to go back and live in caves, but we can live differently. We can enjoy storytelling. We can enjoy community more, rather than, if you look outside, we've created a generation of isolated young people who have more of a relationship with their iPhone and their iPad than they actually do. They're unable to communicate. When I've said to students, hey, let's have a debate, it's like, I can't text it. They're writing essays in tweet speak. So I think I want an audience that aren't committed to sustainability, who are prepared to say, okay, I'll have a listen.
But that's quite easily said, but I think we need to see action from the manufacturers, from the broadcasters, in order to drive that higher up the agenda. Do you know? I don't think we can just rely on the audience.
No, I think what I'd like to see, and I think with BVE we have to look at manufacturers in this way, but I'd like to see the one or two manufacturers that I could name who are seriously starting to embrace sustainability. I'd like them to come up and say why it makes sense for their business plan to do it.
So maybe that's an idea for a session next time. Okay, thank you very much, Janet.
Thanks very much. I'll be here
Thank
for
you
a
all for
couple of
coming.
seconds if anybody wants to ask
I'm off for that
anything.
pint of green beer.
Thank you.